would like to take out a songbook and open to number 185. Number 185. We will be using that through the course of this evening's lesson. And I will go ahead and do as well. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19, where the Bible talks about some of the purposes of songs, hymns, and spiritual songs, and one of those main purposes that's addressed is to teach and to uplift one another. So, yes, this is going to be one of those singing sermons this evening. I like those kind of sermons, though, because it really brings out and points out things in songs that you would otherwise, sing every couple of Sundays. If you pay attention enough, you'll notice that there's certain songs that I really focus on and tend to sing quite a bit. So He Leadeth Me, number 185, is one of those songs that I have always found to be very uplifting. It has a very good melody. The message located within it is also a very good, pertinent message. It can sometimes be when, the singing portion of our time together, we can sometimes lose focus or kind of get lost in the melody, can't we? It's easy to do. There's a lot of things going on in everybody's lives. But, hopefully through this evening, we'll be able to focus back on and look at the words of this beautiful song. If you think through your life, songs are really in every part of your life. There's probably a song for, oh yeah, they're playing that song. They must be happy. It's the weekend, or, it's Monday, they have to go back to work. They're playing that song. They must be pretty sad. I can think of a few in my own life, and you can probably think of some in yours. And I think that's why God has us sing during worship. It's because singing, I don't know if it's just the way our brains are wired, but singing can really uplift each other. We sing when we're joyful. We also can sing when we're sorrowful. Think about during funerals. There's normally some songs that we sing, and those can be really just, have an emotional punch. And, tears and joy, we have songs for everything. So tonight we're going to go through number 185, and we will be singing it at different points throughout the lesson. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to sing the verse, and then we're going to reflect on some of the specific lessons within that verse. So the reason I chose this lesson is that, there's this little thing, how many days away is it? It's coming up pretty quickly. So, voting. We have a big national election, and I'm always thankful this time of year that I don't have cable, so I don't have to listen to any of the ads. But we have that coming up pretty quickly. So this evening, we're going to go through, and I'm going to tell you exactly who you need to vote for on your ballot. That's a joke. The American Psychological Association has estimated through recent surveys, along with all the other polls that are going out, that up to 52% of Americans have experienced some significant distress at the thought of this year's election. It has been an extremely divisive one from either perspective, and they found that those 52% of the people fall pretty equally between both parties. So this got me thinking, how does leadership and leadership choices affect us as Christians? So it got me thinking, okay, well, regardless of the outcome, how does that affect us? And it all comes back to that our leader, our example that we follow is still God, and that's not going to change, regardless of the election, regardless of any situation. I always like to put things into perspective and think back to those early Christians or Christians throughout time. Some of the conditions that they live in, think about the Roman Empire. That was some pretty horrific times, or the Dark Ages, medieval times. Those times were pretty rough, and, the world will go on. We as Christians will survive no matter what the outcome is. But we can still have a lot of anxiety tied to everything that goes along with that. So go ahead and take out your psalm books, number 185. We're just going to go ahead and sing the first verse and hold off on the chorus. He leadeth leadeth me, O blessed thought, O words with heavenly comfort fraught. Whate'er I do, where'er I be, still 'tis God's hand that leadeth me. So that first verse, those first lyrics, were penned by J.H. Gilmore. So he was a Baptist minister in the mid to late 1800s, and he wrote this song when he was 28 years old. He had been sitting through a lesson on the 23rd Psalm. Most of us can probably speak the 23rd Psalm from memory. But during those first couple of sections, it talks about how God leads us. He leads me beside still waters. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And this got him kind of thinking, just focusing on that, he leads me. So Jesus, as the shepherd, leads us in our everyday lives. So he just wrote down on a piece of paper that first verse and then kind of tucked it away. And it wasn't until 3 years later that he was at a meeting in Connecticut, I believe it was, and he opened up the psalm book, and they started to sing a song, and he's like, wait, that's my poem I wrote 3 years ago. And his wife actually had sent that poem into a magazine at the time, and it won the poetry competition and got published. So I thought that story was kind of cool, and the person who set it to music was W.B. Bradbury. So W.B. Bradbury was a famous composer at that time, and he set this poem to music, and then he also added the additional lines. The cool thing that I learned about W.B. Bradbury is he's also composed many of, my favorite songs that we have in our hymnal. If you look at the songs that I lead, a lot of them are William Bradbury, and then a lot of them are Fannie J. Crosby, just in case you're curious when I'm leading songs. But I didn't realize he had written so many great songs. So together they kind of came up with this hymn, He Leadeth Me. So the reason why I point this out is because words can be extremely powerful. I know this song in particular, He Leadeth Me, has touched my life and helped me out through some really, some really hard times in my life. It's also been a song that's, I love to sing it when I'm in moments of joy as well. But those words have touched my life, and words can have significant power. So the words we're going to focus on are, O words with heavenly comfort fraught. So words can have huge impact and huge power in our lives. Think about the ability of, orators throughout time. Orators that have lifted people up, things like people like Martin Luther King, who brought light on the issues of the time in the Deep South. But they also had the ability to tear people down and to start terrible causes. Another great orator, Adolf Hitler. He was very good with his words, but he used those words for evil. So words have very, very great power. The words I want to focus on are the words of Christ that we get through the Bible. So the Bible is a great source of comfort, but also a model of how we're to conduct ourselves in our life and also in our leadership. When you think of an example of leadership in the Bible, you can probably think of people like David. You can think of people like Peter on the day of Pentecost. You can probably also think of some bad forms of leadership like Saul. But you can find really great leaders contained within, people who we should try to emulate. Probably the best example of leadership we have in the Bible, though, is Jesus himself. I had spoke, it's been a couple of months ago, I think, but I spoke at a Wednesday night sermon on the concept of servant leadership. This is a concept I wish modern-day politicians would really try to emulate more, but basically that servant leadership, that style, is to serve first. So many people who want positions of power in our country or in the world, what are they in it for? They're in it to get more power. A servant leader decides to become a leader first and foremost to serve other people around them, to build up, to really bring out people's full potential. Think about Jesus as he was during his ministry. He would focus on those things in his apostles that were, weaknesses, and he would try to build them up. He would also build up on their strengths too. And as a servant leader, he did a wonderful job at this. Think about what his apostles did through his tutelage and his training, and also through the Holy Spirit. They basically changed the entire world. One of the best examples you can think of of servant leadership in the ministry of Jesus was in John 13, where he washed the disciples' feet. He humbled himself to the point of taking the servant role, a role that actually the least servant in the house would do by washing people's feet. And he did this because he loved his disciples, and he wanted to show them an example of humility and that you need to serve others in order to truly be a leader. Sometimes I've had bosses in the past, and when I think of examples of servant leadership, it's been those times. I've had a lot of good bosses in my life, I will say. And all those bosses have shared a commonality in that they're willing to do the same work I'm doing. If some position needs filled in or they need, help doing it, they're not unwilling to do those jobs that, they may see as beneath them. So that's an example I've seen of servant leadership in my own life. Again, I have been extremely fortunate in that regard. But think about how servant leadership could change our country if people would be more willing to serve, not only on a local level, but a state level and then a national level. Think of the change that would impact if more people were more willing to serve first and to not be served. It'd make a very profound effect. Let's go ahead and sing verse number 2. Sometimes mid scenes of deepest gloom, sometimes where Eden's bowers bloom, by waters still or troubled sea, still 'tis God's hand that leadeth me. Everybody close your eyes. I can see everybody's eyes up here, by the way, so I can tell if you have them closed or not. And think of that place where you are 100% at peace. Not a care in the world. When I think of some place like this, I normally think of sitting on a dock. There's a calm little lake beside, and you can hear the water just kind of lapping up on the dock. Might hear a dog in the background, but it's not too far away to be annoying. And there's a cool breeze blowing in. Not a thought or a care in the world. All right, everybody open your eyes. Nobody fall asleep. Sometimes that can make you a little too relaxed. When you think of, the verse says, by water still, I think of just this extremely peaceful area. You can see I put a picture up there of what I imagine. And sometimes when you're in that relaxed of a mode, not a care in the world, nothing on your mind, it's easy to kind of let your guard down, isn't it? It's easy to say, well, I've got it so good, I really don't need to worry about anything. I'm not sure if I really need God that much or, if I really need to be concerned about things. But I think this is one of the tricks that the devil really uses against us. Get us comfortable, and then, since we're comfortable, we really don't need anything, and we don't need God as much in our lives. And I think this is one of the oldest tricks he employs. One of the verses that has been a favorite verse of mine is from Proverbs. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. We see here two extremes illustrated. We have kind of, yep, I just had a big meal. It's kind of like when you go out to the buffet, and afterward you're just like, yeah, I'm going to go take a nap. Or Thanksgiving's coming up, probably have the same feeling, but not a care or a worry. And when you're full like that, you really don't feel like you want anything. The opposite can also be harmful too. When you're hungry and you're starving, many of us have never had to experience that feeling, but at that point, the opposite can be true. Well, God's not really given me anything, so, what's the deal? Why should I believe in him? He can't even provide me with food. He can't even provide me with my basic necessities. The still waters, the examples I think of in Scripture of people who had it really good and kind of let things lapse in their lives from their standpoint of the relationship with God. Solomon was probably one of the richest people ever in history. When you read about the wealth of Solomon, it was, kind of beyond words. People throughout the known world at that day would come and marvel at the amount of wealth that he had, with the buildings, with the treasure that he had. But what happened to Solomon later in life? He fell away from God. Because he had all this stuff, he really had no need for any physical thing, so he fell away from God. Think about Jesus and the rich young ruler. That rich young ruler was unwilling to give up his material possessions and follow Jesus. He pretty much had everything else right when we look at the Scripture, or at least it would lead us to believe he was a good, upright person. But he was unwilling to give it all up, his material possessions, and follow God. And then we had our still waters, and then the anxiety-producing or troubled sea. I have never been out on the open water when there's been a storm approaching, but my wife tells me it's not fun from her experiences on Lake Erie. I am kind of scared. This picture behind me makes me very anxious. Being on the open water, being tossed to and fro at the mercy of the sea, just gives me heebie-jeebies. Sometimes our lives can feel like that, though. We just are being tossed back and forth from one problem to another. And during these times, it can be really hard not to question God, not to keep our focus on God because of all those troubles swirling around us. Some examples I think of, Joseph. So Joseph being sold by his brothers into Egyptian captivity, he's put in jail. He rises to power in Potiphar's house, and then gets accused of having an affair with his wife. And he gets sold to Potiphar, and then he gets thrown into jail. And he just has setback after setback, but he keeps his focus on God, and he rises above it. Think of Job. His wife said, "Curse God and die." He lost all his children. He lost his wealth. He lost his health, but still, he was faithful to God. Jesus, to me, is the ultimate example. He gave his life for us. And it wasn't, not some, there's multiple ways that one can pass, but to bear the struggle of the crucifixion is something that, is beyond words how much agony he went through for us. But all the while, he is faithful to God. And then those early apostles, the struggles that they had to face. So through this all, they kept their focus and their minds on God. So they did this through a number of different ways, through prayer. Think of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane before he went to trial, before he was turned over to the authorities. Through study. I think in my own life, in the times that have been most troublesome for me, are the times when I really, really was deep in depth in God's Word and was really looking to that for the strength and the guidance that I needed. And that can uplift you through those times. It can help you out through them. And then lastly, fellowship. Sometimes when I talk to just relating my experiences from working at an occupation like at a cancer center, the people who do best, and I'm talking about best kind of mentally, from a mental standpoint, are the ones who have a spiritual family around them. They're the ones who are able to rely on, to lean on others, to help them. And when I see them in follow-ups and things, they're the ones who are, even though their body around them may be failing, inside, they've got it figured out. And it's through that spiritual family that they have, through that comfort during those troubled times. Let's go ahead and sing verse number 3. Lord, I would clasp thy hand in mine, nor ever murmur, nor repine. Content whatever lot I see, since 'tis my God that leadeth me. What I wanted to focus on here was nor murmur or repine. Again, the setting that I work at, people can have a lot of problems. First and foremost, it's normally because of their health. A cancer diagnosis, they have to deal with that. It can zap their energy. The chemotherapy can have some really nasty side effects. But I'm always amazed at people's ability. You go up and see somebody, and the nurse has told you, they've had a really rough time. But you go in to see them, and you say, how you doing today? I've heard it's not gone too well. I'm doing pretty good. It's just like, your body is failing around you. You've been vomiting 5 out of 7 days of the week. You've been in bed for half the day for the past 2 weeks. But they'll still say, I'm doing all right. It's not too bad. And to me, that's such a uplifting example of, looking on the bright side of things. So when you see in this third verse, nor ever murmur, nor repine, even at our lowest, we are still extremely blessed. Think about living in this country, the things that we have. Most of us, it's, 1 to 2 cars, and we have a pretty decent house, and we're able to, put a little money away every paycheck, hopefully. If you're able to do those things, have a full closet full of clothes, then you're better off than about 95% of the world. Because there's a lot of people living in this world who aren't able to do those things. So we are very richly blessed materially. So we have everything we need. And we read in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus talks about how the lilies of the field are clothed, how the birds have homes, and we are going to have all those physical blessings as Christians if we obey Christ and are faithful to him. So we'll have all those material blessings. That's not to say we're going to have, above and beyond everything. We're always going to have the essentials, and it's nice if we have the other things. The real blessings that come, though, are those spiritual blessings. So in Ephesians, it talks about we have every spiritual blessing in heaven. Now, what does every spiritual blessing in heaven mean? I'm not sure exactly what that means. But I know that the heavenly blessings are beyond what we can fathom here on earth. And those are available if we're faithful to Christ. But living on this earth, sometimes it's easy to focus on the negative. I'm fortunate again to be around a group of patients who probably 95 times out of 100 are extremely positive and uplifting. But I know Roger has used this illustration before. Sometimes you ask certain people how they're doing, and you're kind of hesitant to be like, so, how are you doing? And it's like, I'm just going to go over here. Because that list of how they're doing is pretty long. So sometimes, though, I think we all do it at some point in our lives. We can kind of focus on those negative things that are going on in our lives. But the Bible teaches us that attitude does matter. And we are really richly blessed. But again, sometimes it can be easy to lose our focus on that. In Numbers chapter 11, verse 1, when I think of complaining in the Bible, I always think of the Israelites during the wilderness wanderings. And in this particular instance, they were complaining so much and so heavily that the outer settlements of the camp were swallowed up with fire. So we don't really see that nowadays, though, thankfully. But when I think of that, again, it's, their attitude was so bad that that was the only way to really deal with it at that time. In Proverbs, we can see in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 22, it talks about how a joyful heart is good medicine, and a crushed spirit dries up. I can't read my word there. A crushed spirit dries up the bones. If you've ever been in an anatomy lab, which I've been taking a lot of anatomy courses and things, or if you've been on a cattle farm, you can see bones that are just dried, they're cracked, they're empty of life. And that's really a stark metaphor when you think about what that crushed spirit can do. Again, it's the difference between patients who are, joyful about life, even though everything else is going wrong. They do so much better than people who have that crushed spirit. And I can see that just in medicine. And then Philippians, it talks about doing all things without grumbling or questioning. And if we take this attitude, it can really help us in our everyday lives. Again, is that to say that we won't feel overwhelmed at points in our lives? No. The example I think of in the Bible is Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 19. So he had just come off of this huge win. So the prophets of Baal had been assembled, and Elijah was there. And they kind of had a test to see whose God was the real God. Was it Baal or was it Lord Jehovah? And the prophets of Baal spent, hours and hours and hours trying to summon Baal. Elijah even at one point said, he must be sleeping, he must be tired, maybe he's doing something, maybe he's got something else to attend to. And then God rained down fire on Elijah's sacrifice to show that he was truly God. So this was a big win for Elijah. But after that, Jezebel, Ahab was sad at that point, and him and Jezebel were together, and Jezebel was hunting after Elijah's life. And we find that he becomes depressed. He goes and hides in a cave. And is at the point where he just tells God, basically, take my life, I'd be better off dead. So you can see this on the mountain and then down in the valley. So some keys to Elijah overcoming his problem was to not presume the outcome. We can use this in our own lives. How many times do we get wrapped up in a problem and we always think worst case scenario, the worst thing is going to happen and it's going to be terrible forever? How often does that really happen in reality? Not very often as what we would think it would be. So don't presume that the outcome is going to be terrible. Trusting God to handle things and to deliver you. And then don't focus on the problem. Elijah was completely and totally focused on Jezebel and what Jezebel was going to do to him once he was captured. But what he should have been focusing on was, okay, God just swallowed up an entire sacrifice with this giant fire that came down from heaven. I think that he can deliver me from some evil lady named Jezebel. So don't focus too much on that. Focus on what God can do for you. Let's go ahead and sing the last verse here, and we'll also sing the chorus at this time. And when my task on earth is done, when by thy grace the victory's won, in death's cold wave I will not flee, since God through Jordan leadeth me. He leadeth me by his own hand, he leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by his hand he leadeth me. unseen, death's cold wave I will not flee. When you think about the prospect of dying, I know I'm really ending on a high note here. When you think about the prospect of facing death, it's one of those things that, until we're there, we don't know exactly how we'll react. But when you sing this last verse, I'm struck by the confidence that you can have when facing death. And, we've had a lot of people pass on, and if you think through the years, people who have passed on. But think about those people who have passed on, who've been confident in their reward in Christ. I think about patients I've seen. I think about people here. And people who have that confidence, death isn't anything to necessarily worry about or be scared of. It's a reward. Because after that, the suffering on this earth, the things of this world are all going to just be gone as they shed that mortal coil and go on to the reward. The key to having that confidence, though, is preparation. I always like the analogy of, being prepared for a test. My students this Thursday are going to be taking a test over the orthopedic or musculoskeletal system. If they come in Thursday morning and they haven't studied this past weekend, which they have to study all the time, but if they haven't studied this past week and this weekend and this week, then they're not going to do well on that test. And I can normally tell when they walk into the room if they're prepared or not. The ones who are unprepared normally have an extra large thing of coffee because they're up all night, the whole night before studying. They're kind of jittery. They have just bags under their eyes. They don't look very well because they know of their impending doom with that test. They can make it up later. It's not all doom and gloom, but I can tell that they're very nervous, as opposed to the student who has prepared, who has been studying over the weekend, who has been taking good notes during class. They come in with a certain air of confidence. I always tell students when I was in school, I wanted to get to that point. I called it my don't care point. I'd be reading through my notes, and I was like, you know what? I know this so well. Give me the test right now. I was going to ace it. It takes a lot of studying, a lot of preparation to get to that point. But that's the point that we need to be at with our relationship with God if we're going to be confident to go into the afterlife. Let's go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 to 13. This is the parable of the wise and the foolish virgins. Many of you have probably been involved in wedding planning. Does it take a little bit of planning to do a wedding? Shake your head no. It takes a lot of planning. It takes months of preparation. It takes reserving the venue. It takes getting the caterers all online, picking out the dress. Does this invitation coordinate with the programs? Do those programs coordinate with the flowers? There's just a mind-boggling amount of things for preparation. And we can see the preparation that these 10 virgins had with the wedding feast. They needed to get oil for their lamps. Now that may seem simple, but think about back then. Did they have street lights? No. Did they have flashlights they could go get? No. So they had lamps, and those lamps were powered by oil. If you didn't have oil for your lamp, you're not going to be able to go out at night. So let's read starting in verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, "Here's the bridegroom. Come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give up some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves." And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered, Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you neither know the hour, neither know the day nor the hour. This illustrates perfectly why preparation is so important. If we're not prepared to meet God and have that right relationship with him, if he's not leading our lives every day, then we can't have that reward. So we need to be cognizant, we need to be aware of God's leadership in our lives, and every day show by our example and by our actions that he is leading in our lives. If you're not prepared this evening, we're going to have the invitation song as a chance for you to come forward to either put his name on baptism, or if you've been wayward, to come back to him. But if you're not